Welcome back to the deep dive. It is Tuesday, January 27, 2026. And look, if you've been anywhere near a news app, a newspaper, or even just Twitter in India over the last 48 hours, you know the map is just lighting up.
It is.
We are seeing these significant protests all across North India, Delhi, Rajasthan, parts of UP. The visuals are, well, they're intense. You've got police barricades, student marches, even resignations.
It is a chaotic start to the year for Indian education, to say the very least.
It really is. And the three letters at the center of all this noise are UGC, the University Grants Commission. But, having read through the stack of reports and Gazette notifications we have for today, I realize something tricky is happening here.
Yeah, it's a classic case of signal interference.
Yeah.
Two loud noises at once.
Right. Because there isn't actually one story here. There are two completely separate massive events happening at the same time involving the exact same institution. And I think, honestly, 90% of the public is mashing them into one big ball of outrage.
I'd agree with that. You've got the immediate fire, and then you've got the slow-moving earthquake happening underneath.
Okay, so our job today is to pull these two apart. First, we have the breaking news. That's the UGC Promotion of Equity Regulations 2026. This is the stuff about discrimination and social justice that has people on the streets right now.
That's the fire.
And then second, we have the new act, the Viksit Bharat Shiksha Atishthan Bill 2025. This isn't about changing the rules. This is about literally deleting the UGC and replacing it with something else entirely.
Which is the earthquake.
Yeah.
One changes how the game is played, the other one just blows up the referee.
So let's start with the fire, the immediate crisis. This goes back to a notification from January 13th, 2026. Why did it take 2 whole weeks for the explosion to happen?
Well, bureaucracy has a lag time. The notification dropped on the 13th, but it takes time for, legal teams at universities and student unions to actually digest the fine print.
Right, to figure out what it all means.
Exactly. So by the time they realized what these regulations actually mandated, we hit Republic Day, and now, the 27th, the reaction is peaking.
The headline change seems to be this shift from a guideline to a regulation.
That is the crucial distinction. We've had anti-discrimination guidelines since 2012. But a guideline is like a suggestion from a parent. You should do it, it'd be nice if you did it, but if you don't,
Nothing really happened.
nothing happens. These new 2026 rules are regulations. They're legally binding statutes.
And what exactly are universities being forced to do now that they weren't doing, say, last month?
They have to immediately establish 2 bodies, an Equal Opportunity Center, or EOC, and an Equity Committee. The mandate is to handle complaints of discrimination on campus. But the part that has administrators sweating, and I mean really panicking, is the timeline.
I was reading the source notes on this, and the speed is startling.
It's blistering. If a student files a discrimination complaint, the institution must acknowledge it within 24 hours.
24 hours?
And get this, they must resolve the complaint within 15 days.
Okay, hold on. Anyone who has dealt with academic administration knows that just getting a transcript can take a month. Mandating a judicial-style resolution to a harassment claim in 15 days? That feels, well, almost impossible without cutting corners.
That is the operational fear. But the government's counterargument is that for decades, due process was just a euphemism for delay until the student graduates and leaves. They want to break that cycle.
And to make sure universities don't just ignore this, the regulations have some serious teeth.
They do. The funding cuts.
Right.
If a college fails to act or tries to hide the complaint, the UGC can withhold their grants. They can even strip the institution of its recognition. Essentially, if you don't police discrimination at this speed, you could go out of business.
And there's also a big expansion in who is covered here, isn't there?
Yes, and this is a major point. Previously, the focus was heavily on scheduled castes, SCs, and scheduled tribes, FTs. The 2026 regulations explicitly bring other backward classes, or OBCs, into the main protection framework. It's a massive expansion of the scope.
Okay, so if I'm looking at this from just a surface level, it sounds like a robust accountability measure. Faster justice, wider coverage, punishing lazy administrators. But the streets are chanting black law. And it's not just the usual suspects. We're seeing general category students and even faculty bodies protesting. What is the specific legal grievance here?
It really comes down to this idea of the presumption of guilt. The critics, and this includes legal scholars, not just angry students, argue that the regulations basically shift the burden of proof onto the accused.
How so?
Well, usually in law, he who alleges must prove, right?
Yeah.
But in these equity hearings, the structure seems to imply that if a complaint is made, the bias is sort of assumed unless the institution or individual can prove otherwise. But there's a more specific detail that has really lit the fuse.
The missing clause.
The missing safeguard, yes. If you look at the old 2012 rules, there's a specific clause that penalized false or malicious complaints.
So if I made up a lie to destroy your career, I would face some kind of punishment.
Exactly. It was the check against the balance. The protesters are pointing out that the 2026 regulations have removed this specific language regarding penalties for false complaints.
That creates a really terrifying game theory scenario. If there is zero cost to filing a fake complaint, but a massive cost to the accused, and the university is terrified of losing funding if they don't act in 15 days, it just incentivizes weaponization.
That is exactly the fear. It's the shoot first, ask questions later approach. You have a grudge against a professor for a bad grade or a rival student, you file a complaint. The university, fearing the UGC, might suspend the accused immediately just to show they are acting within that tiny window.
And this isn't just theoretical. We saw a city magistrate in Bareilly resign yesterday over this.
Yes, and that's a signal that this isn't just campus politics. When a sitting magistrate resigns in protest over a notification stating it violates principles of natural justice, it validates the argument that the legal framework here is slippery.
I also saw some concerns about the very definition of discrimination itself.
It's the implicit bias clause. The regulations use terms like implicit bias as grounds for complaint. Now, sociologically, implicit bias is real. We all have. It's the subconscious associations we make. But codifying it into a penal regulation is, well, it's a nightmare.
Because how do you even prove it? If a professor grades a student harshly, is that academic rigor? Or is it implicit bias against the student's background?
Exactly. And if the professor is from a general category and the student is from a marginalized group, the new equity committee structure might default to assuming bias because implicit means you don't even have to prove intent.
And speaking of that committee, who's on it?
This is the other friction point. The equity committee must have representatives from SC, ST, OBC, women, and persons with disabilities, which, for representation, makes total sense.
Sure.
But critics are shouting about the fact that there's no mandatory general category representative. They argue this makes the jury inherently partial from the start.
So one side sees a necessary shield against historic harassment, and the other side sees a sword that can be used without any consequence.
That's a perfect way to put it.
But we have to ask, why did the government do this? They aren't politically naive. They had to know this would cause a firestorm.
Oh, they did. But you have to look at the pressure cooker they've been sitting on. Just look at the headlines from the last 3 years regarding student suicides, specifically in top-tier institutes like the IITs.
It's been a tragic, recurring theme in the news.
It really has. And the Supreme Court has been hammering the government on this issue. The government's assessment was that the old system was just too soft. The equal opportunity cells existed on paper but did nothing.
So they felt they needed to swing the pendulum hard.
Perhaps too hard, yes, to force a culture change. They seem to have prioritized protecting the vulnerable over the procedural comfort of the majority.
So that's the fire. That's why people are screaming in Delhi today. But while everyone is fighting about the rules, the government is quietly moving to kill the rulemaker.
And this is where the story gets really structural. While all these protests are happening, Parliament is reviewing the Viksit Pada Shisha Adhishtan Bill 2025.
Let's just call it the VBSA bill to save us some time. This is the new act. And the headline is basically the death of the UGC.
Yes. The bill proposes to dissolve the University Grants Commission entirely. And not just the UGC, it also dissolves the AICTE, the All India Council for Technical Education.
Whoa, that's huge. UGC covers universities. AICTE covers engineering and technical colleges. That's basically the entire higher education map of India.
Except for law and medicine, yes. They're merging these two giants into a single regulator, the VBSA.
On the face of it, merging bureaucracies usually sounds like a good idea. Less red tape, streamlined processes. Why is this so controversial?
It sounds like standard administrative reform until you look at the separation of powers. This is the technical insight that really, really matters for you to understand.
Okay, break that down for us.
Currently, the UGC has a dual mandate. It regulates, meaning it sets the standards and rules, and it grants, meaning it holds the money bag, hence University Grants Commission.
So the same body that tells you what to do also gives you the money to do it.
Correct. And crucially, the UGC is a statutory body. It has a layer of insulation from the government of the day. It's composed of academics, experts. The new VBSA bill splits these functions. The VBSA will handle academic standards and regulation. But the money, the grants, that power is being stripped away.
Where does the money go?
It moves directly to the Ministry of Education.
Ah, okay, I see the red flag.
It's a massive shift in leverage. If the Ministry of Education directly controls the purse strings, academics fear that universities will lose their autonomy. It becomes much, much harder for a vice chancellor to say no to a political request or a curriculum change if the person asking is the exact same person signing the paycheck.
It effectively turns universities into departments of the government rather than independent centers of learning.
That's the accusation. And this triggers a huge federalism debate.
Because of the state universities.
Exactly. You have to remember, India is a federal structure. Education is on the concurrent list. Both the center and the states have a say, but money is the ultimate veto. If the central ministry controls the grants directly, the state governments lose leverage over their own institutions. A state university in, say, Tamil Nadu or Bengal might find its funding choked if it doesn't align with the policy from New Delhi.
So if the center says adopt this new syllabus and the state says no, the center can just close the tap.
Under the UGC model, the UGC would mediate that based on academic merit. Under the VBSA model, the ministry just decides. It completely politicizes the funding process.
So we have a pincer movement here. The equity regulations are intervening in the social culture on campus, and the VBSA bill is centralizing the entire financial power structure.
Yes. And while they are separate legal moves, the philosophy connects them. It's a clear shift from autonomy to accountability.
Let's try to synthesize this for everyone listening. Usually when policies change this drastically, there are winners and losers. If we look at both these developments together, who comes out on top?
Well, if we look at the scorecard, the clear winners are marginalized students, SC, ST, and now OBCs. They are getting a grievance redressal system that actually has to respond to them in 15 days. That is a massive upgrade in civil rights on campus.
Okay, and the private sector.
Private and foreign universities are likely popping champagne over the VBSA bill.
Why is that?
Because they don't rely on government grants anyway, so the funding control doesn't hurt them. But the VBSA promises to reduce the inspectorage, that nightmare of constant inspections and approvals. A single regulator usually means easier compliance for private players who want to set up shop in India.
And who is in the danger zone?
Well, general category students feel incredibly vulnerable about this false complaint issue. But structurally, the biggest losers are likely state universities. They are getting squeezed from both sides. Stricter compliance costs from the equity rules, and then reduced financial autonomy from the VBSA structure.
And I imagine the thousands of employees of the UGC aren't sleeping very well either.
No, they are facing an existential crisis. When you dissolve a massive organization to build a new one, jobs are always on the line.
So what happens next? It's January 27th. The protests are hot. Does the government back down on this?
On the equity regulations, I think we're going to see a blink. The education minister has already issued statements assuring people that the rules won't be misused.
Which is pretty much politicians speak for, we messed up a little.
Pretty much. It is highly likely we will see a core addendum or an amendment very soon that adds a clause about protecting against false complaints. If they do that, if they bring back that penalty for malicious intent, I think the student protests will lose 80% of their steam.
And the VBSA bill.
That's a much slower burn. It's currently with a parliamentary standing committee. It likely won't pass until the monsoon session, or maybe even late 2026. There will be a lot of horse trading, especially with state governments, to make sure the funding mechanism doesn't look like a total power grab by the center.
So the chaos we are seeing today is really just the opening act of a year-long transformation.
Absolutely. We are watching the architecture of Indian education being gutted and renovated in real time.
You know, throughout this deep dive, we've talked about rules, funding, and committees. But there's a bigger question here about effectiveness, isn't there?
How so?
Well, we are stripping the regulator, the VBSA, of its power to give grants. The VBSA will set the standards, say, do X, Y, and Z. But the ministry holds the checkbook.
Right.
So does the VBSA actually become more effective at setting standards because it's more focused? Or, by losing the power of the purse, does it just become a toothless tiger barking at universities that only listen to the ministry paying the bills? Can you really regulate someone if you aren't the one paying them?
That is the multi-billion rupee question. If the VBSA says jump, but the ministry doesn't say, here's the money to buy the trampoline, then, well, no one is jumping.
Something to chew on as you watch the news unfold this week. We'll keep tracking this as the amendments come in because they almost certainly will. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
See you next time.